She deleted the photo 3 minutes after posting it. 3 minutes. But that was enough. Millions of fans had already seen it, saved it, shared it, and started asking the question that would dominate Turkish entertainment news for the next 2 years. Was Barış Arduç secretly in love with Elçin Sangu? And more importantly, had they been hiding something from everyone the whole time? This is not just a celebrity story. This is a story about two people who lived their private lives inside the most public profession on earth, who fell in love while cameras were already rolling, and who somehow managed to keep it real when everything around them was designed to be performance. But to understand how they got there, you have to go back to before any of this was a rumor. Back to when they were just two talented actors building separate careers in one of the most competitive television industries in the world. Turkish drama had exploded globally by the early 2010s. Shows produced in Istanbul were being broadcast in over 150 countries. The audiences were massive, the expectations were intense, and the actors who landed leading roles became overnight cultural phenomena. Barış Arduç was one of those actors. He had the kind of presence that directors talk about in casting rooms, a combination of natural charisma and technical discipline that made him believable no matter what role he was playing. He was not an overnight sensation. He had worked steadily, built his craft carefully, and when the right project came along, audiences noticed. Elçin Sangu had a different path, but an equally compelling one. She came from a background that mixed commercial success with a genuine desire to take on complex characters. She was the kind of actress who could carry an emotional scene without saying a single word. Her eyes did the work that most actors need entire monologues for. Fans adored her. Critics respected her. And somewhere along the way, the industry began pairing them together on screen. When they were first cast opposite each other, the chemistry was noticeable immediately. Not in a manufactured, carefully produced for press kind of way. In the uncomfortable, slightly dangerous way that real chemistry reads on camera. Directors noticed. Co-stars noticed. And within a few episodes of their shared project, the internet noticed too. Fan accounts started within weeks. Edit videos on YouTube collected millions of views. People were not just watching the show, they were studying it, slowing down scenes, analyzing the way Barış looked at Elçin during takes that were supposed to be about something else entirely. There is a particular kind of audience devotion that forms around on-screen couples who feel genuine, and these two had triggered exactly that. But here is where the story gets more complicated than a straightforward love at first sight narrative. Both of them were private people. Intensely, almost stubbornly private, in an industry that runs on visibility and disclosure. While other Turkish celebrities were posting relationship updates, attending events together, and giving interviews about their personal lives, Barış and Elçin maintained clear boundaries between what they shared publicly and what they kept for themselves. That made the rumors harder to confirm and, for anyone paying attention, harder to dismiss. The speculation began seriously around 2016. Fans had noticed patterns. The way they talked about each other in interviews was subtly different from how co-stars typically described their working relationships. There was warmth there, but also something guarded, like two people who were very careful with words because words have consequences. When journalists asked direct questions about whether there was anything beyond friendship, both of them answered in ways that technically confirmed nothing but emotionally suggested everything. One interview in particular circulated extensively. Barış was asked whether he could separate real feelings from the emotional demands of playing a romantic lead. His answer was thoughtful and slightly evasive in a way that interviewers often miss, but audiences never do. He talked about how the best performances come from drawing on something authentic. He talked about trust between co-stars being the foundation of believable chemistry. He did not mention Elçin by name. But the pause before his answer was exactly 3 seconds long. Fans counted. Elçin was equally careful. She spoke about professionalism, about the discipline required to maintain boundaries when a role demands emotional vulnerability. She was articulate and measured. And then, when asked if she had ever found herself genuinely moved by a scene partner rather than the character they were playing, she smiled in a way that stopped the conversation completely. The interviewer laughed nervously. Elçin moved on to the next question. Nobody forgot that smile. Social media in Turkey is particularly intense around celebrity culture. Platforms like Instagram and Twitter became spaces where fans essentially conducted their own investigations, compiling evidence the way journalists compile sources. A photo taken at an industry event showing the two of them standing close. A comment left on a post that got deleted too quickly. A mutual friend's story that inadvertently placed them in the same location on a quiet weekend when neither of them had any public commitments. The deleted photo that started this whole piece came from that period. It appeared on a fan account that had somehow obtained an image showing Barış and Elçin together in what appeared to be a personal, non-professional setting. The photo was not dramatic. It was actually quite ordinary. Two people relaxed, not performing for the camera. That ordinariness was what made it significant. Celebrities know how to pose for photos. They know how to look like friends without looking like a couple. This photo looked like neither of them had thought about the camera at all. And that, to millions of fans who had spent months analyzing their body language on a television set, felt like the most genuine thing they had ever seen from either of them. It disappeared in 3 minutes. The account that posted it went private. But by then, the screenshot had been saved by enough people that it became a permanent part of the story being told about Barış Arduç and Elçin Sangu. Now, before going further, this is the point where the actual facts need to be carefully separated from what was rumor and what was confirmed. Because in celebrity culture, the line between those things gets blurred constantly, and it is unfair to the people involved when speculation gets reported as truth. What was confirmed? Barış Arduç and Elçin Sangu had a close professional relationship. They worked together on projects that required significant emotional collaboration. They spoke warmly about each other in public. They were seen together on multiple occasions by credible witnesses and in published photographs. What was rumored? That the professional relationship had become a romantic one. That they were in a relationship privately while maintaining public distance. That their careful answers in interviews were a deliberate strategy rather than simple professionalism. And then, in a way that neither confirmed nor denied anything, their separate personal lives began to shift publicly at around the same time. Elçin Sangu's relationship history had been covered by Turkish media in ways that were sometimes respectful and sometimes not. Barış Arduç had similarly seen his personal life become tabloid material on multiple occasions. Both of them had clearly made decisions about how much of themselves they were willing to offer to public consumption. The fascinating thing about how this story unfolded is that the confirmation, when it came, was so quiet that some people almost missed it. There was no announcement, no coordinated post, no interview where they held hands and explained their timeline. There was just a gradual shift in how they existed in the same public spaces. A slight drop in the performance of distance. A presence at events that stopped being explained away as coincidence by even the most skeptical observers. Turkish entertainment media, which had been speculating for years, eventually began reporting the relationship as established fact rather than rumor. But even then, the reporting was careful because Barış and Elçin had never given the full story. They had allowed the story to become visible without ever narrating it themselves. That choice said something significant about who they both were. What makes this love story genuinely interesting beyond the celebrity fascination is what it reveals about the particular pressure that actors face in romantic relationships. When your professional life requires you to simulate intimacy convincingly, the management of real intimacy becomes extraordinarily complex. Actors who fall in love with co-stars carry an extra weight that other couples do not. Every public appearance is analyzed through the lens of performance. Every interview answer is treated as a clue. The genuine moments are constantly at risk of being consumed by an audience that cannot fully distinguish between the story on screen and the life off it. Barış Arduç had spoken in various interviews about the challenge of maintaining authenticity in a career built on portraying other people's experiences. There was a thoughtfulness to his approach to work that suggested someone who took the psychological dimensions of acting seriously. He was not just performing roles, he was considering what those roles cost emotionally and what they required in terms of personal resource. Elçin Sangu had similar depth in how she discussed her craft. She had talked about the vulnerability required for certain scenes, the particular trust that had to exist between collaborators for those scenes to work. She had also talked about the complexity of being a public figure in a culture that had strong and sometimes conflicting expectations about women in entertainment. She navigated that with visible intelligence and a refusal to be defined entirely by how the industry or the audience wanted to frame her. Put these two people together, and the question is not why they might have fallen in love. The question is how they managed to fall in love under conditions designed to make authentic connection nearly impossible. Because the fishbowl of celebrity culture does something specific to relationships. It creates a pressure to perform the relationship for public consumption. Couples who exist in that space often find that they are not quite living their relationship, they are presenting it. The performance replaces the experience. And gradually, the relationship stops being something real and becomes another role. The fact that Barış and Elçin resisted that, refused to perform a relationship for an audience even when an audience was desperately requesting that performance, suggests something genuine about what existed between them. You do not protect something you do not value. Privacy, in their case, was not evasiveness. It was evidence. When confirmation of the relationship became effectively public, the fan response was overwhelming and almost universally positive. This was notable because celebrity couple reveals often generate complicated reactions. Fans who had invested emotionally in a fantasy version of the celebrity sometimes respond with something close to grief when reality arrives. But in this case, the response was different. Fans who had spent years hoping this was real seemed genuinely delighted that it was. The investment they had made in analyzing moments and reading between lines felt validated rather than violated. Part of that response had to do with how the confirmation happened. Because it was gradual, because it allowed fans to arrive at the conclusion themselves rather than having it announced to them, the revelation felt participatory rather than declarative. Fans had not been told a story. They had figured one out. And there is a particular satisfaction in that. The media coverage that followed tried to construct a neat narrative, the kind that has a clear beginning, middle, and arc. They tried to identify the first moment, the turning point, the declaration. But Barış and Elçin did not give them that. The story they allowed to be told was incomplete in the most interesting possible way. It had a confirmed present but a protected past. And that withholding was itself a statement. In the years that followed, their relationship became something that both of them referenced obliquely rather than directly. There were appearances together that were photographed. There were moments captured by fans that circulated widely. There was a growing public acknowledgement that this was a real relationship between two real people who happened to also be very famous. But the intimacy remained theirs. The details remained private. And in a media landscape that treats privacy as suspicious and disclosure as proof of authenticity, that choice continued to be both radical and quietly admirable. There is something worth saying about what their story reflects about Turkish celebrity culture specifically. Turkey has a particularly intense relationship with its entertainment figures. The actors and musicians who achieve major success become part of the cultural fabric in ways that go beyond simple fandom. Their personal lives are treated as shared property, their relationships as community narratives. This creates enormous pressure on individuals who might simply want to live their lives without that level of commentary. Barış Arduç and Elçin Sangu navigated this pressure in a way that protected them without alienating the audiences who cared about them. They found a middle space between disclosure and closure that kept fans engaged without surrendering everything. That is genuinely difficult to do, and the fact that they managed it without major public conflict or media scandal says a lot about both of them. There are actors who handle this badly, who get resentful of audience investment in their personal lives and respond with hostility that damages the relationship between them and their fan base. There are others who swing to the opposite extreme, over-disclosing, using their relationship as content, and finding eventually that there is nothing left that feels truly personal. Barış and Elçin took a third path that acknowledged the audience's interest without serving it on demand. They were generous with their professional lives and protective of their private ones, and they maintained that distinction with remarkable consistency. The questions that still remain, the ones the internet cannot fully answer, are actually the most interesting ones. What were those early conversations like between two people who were falling in love while being paid to fall in love on camera? How did they decide together how much to share and how much to keep? What does it feel like to have your most significant relationship become the subject of ongoing public speculation and to choose to continue living it privately anyway? These are questions that only they can answer, and so far, they have chosen not to. Which means the audience is left with the outline of a story rather than its full text. And maybe that is exactly right. Maybe the most honest thing about this love story is that most of it happened somewhere the cameras could not reach. What we know is this. Two genuinely talented people found each other in an industry that makes real connection difficult. They chose authenticity over performance at every point where those two things were in conflict. They protected what was most important to them even when the pressure to do otherwise was enormous. And they gave audiences enough of themselves to be loved without ever giving away the parts that mattered most. That is not a small thing. In a world that monetizes intimacy and treats private life as just more content waiting to be produced, the choice to keep something genuinely your own is almost an act of rebellion. Barış Arduç and Elçin Sangu never needed to explain their relationship to anyone. What they gave the world was their work, their professionalism, and just enough of themselves to make people care. Everything else, the deleted photos, the counted pauses, the smiles that stopped conversations, those were gifts to the people paying close enough attention. The full story belongs to the two people who lived it. And, honestly, knowing that it exists, somewhere past the cameras and the fan accounts and the media speculation, real and complete and entirely their own, that might be the most romantic thing about it. What do you think? Let us know in the comments.